lies affect the masses. There's no excuse. You've been loosed.
This is From Destruction to Dignity with Janice Pons. Each week, Janice shares her wisdom to enlighten, educate, and advance the culture in America today. Janice Pons is a mother, author, and free thinker, and your host for our podcast this evening. Now let's join your host, Janice Pons.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Come on in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Janice Pons. I'm the host on this broadcast, on this podcast, From Destruction to Dignity, Clinical Perspective, Spiritual Truths. Tonight, we're going to continue our amazing journey as we the people. We've been focused on a specific path related to gaining a clear understanding regarding how our nation is structured, how it's supposed to work. This flag that's behind me, I love our flag. It's a great symbol connected to our amazing nation. This seal right here is a reminder of the importance of praying for the president of this great nation, the People's House, the White House. I am continuing to pray for the millions of Americans who through in 2024 were living paycheck to paycheck, barely making ends meet. 265 million, 900,000 Americans, 78% of working Americans struggled so hard in 2024. We remember when Bret Baier interviewed Kamala Harris, and it came out at that time that 79% of Americans felt that the country was going in the wrong direction. And so people spoke with their vote. The majority of citizens spoke loud and clear. The Democratic process played itself out, and the American people issued a mandate loud and clear. We had an election. The people spoke on what was really important in light of the dynamics being presented to us. The economy and illegal immigration were the top two issues that drove people's voting, not the things that Ms. Harris was focused on. It wasn't important to people, not the majority. I've repeatedly asked on this venue, who needs to be the leader? What's at stake? Does it matter who's in the White House? Well, that determines the nation has been made. Where are we now? Some people are struggling with acceptance of the results. Yeah, they are. They're struggling. But the question is this: can we move on as a nation? Does our country have a history of moving on, things that happen? We moved on. We're going to look at some dynamics related to all of this together. Everything that we're dealing with in this nation connects to our Constitution and how it influences how we operate and what we adhere to as we the people. There's an executive branch of the government that affects us all. That's the president. Whether we like it or not, Donald John Trump, was voted as the head of the executive branch of the government. Trump warned that without change, the country could be headed towards an economic depression. He outlined a plan focused on closing the border, lowering taxes, reducing inflation. All of these were issues that he believed were crucial to turning the country around. He attributed the economic struggles to Kamala Harris and her allies, saying their policies are responsible for the issues America was facing. Trump's campaign has focused on urging what he did. He told Republicans, he said, listen, y'all need to go vote early. With events and rallies displaying banners encouraging early voter turnout, and that is exactly what happened. I went to early voting and I stood in line for 1 hour and 45 minutes, enjoyed every minute of it. My great-grandmother was born a slave. She couldn't vote. I fought for people couldn't vote. I grew up in Jim Crow. We couldn't vote. I was glad to stand in that line for 1 hour and 45 minutes. So Trump believed that a strong turnout was essential for Republicans to win, especially in tight races across the country. He closed his ad with a call to action. He said, go and vote. reminding viewers of the chance to bring the country back on track. His strategy was right in sync with the majority of Americans. He stated, I have come today with a message of hope for all Americans. And he said this, he said, with your vote, I'm going to end inflation. I will stop the massive invasion of criminals into our country, and I will bring back the American dream. What did Harris do? She had celebrities, while Trump had hardworking, everyday American. Now listen, and it came out that she had, like $1 billion. And when it was all over, she was $20 million in debt and still asking for money. Wow. So she has celebrities, and that didn't work. The hard-working Americans won, not the celebrities. Oprah didn't do it for her. Beyonce, Usher, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Bruce Springsteen, Whoopi Goldberg, the Obamas. It wasn't enough. Are they out of touch with the nation, is what I want to ask. Why didn't that work? Yes, my clinical mind always says, as evidenced by what? If the Democratic Party was so out of touch with the majority of Americans, what is the evidence of that being the case? No one captured it better than my son. When I was raising my son, I started teaching him how to read when he was 3 weeks old. By the time he was 2, people were like, what are you talking about? You teaching your son how to read at 3 weeks old? I was tearing him in my arms. I was saying, I'm turning the light on. See the light coming on? I'm turning it off. It's dark now. I'm putting the book on top of the table. I'm putting the chair under the table. I was always explaining things. I was always talking about who, what, when, where, how, and why regarding everything around him. So by the time he was 2, he was assessed and he was tested and assessed to have the vocabulary of a 5-year-old at the age of 2. I was very intentional with him. And the kinds of things that I did with him were the kinds of things that I did as a teacher when I worked as an elementary school teacher. I worked in middle school, high school, also as a school psychologist, teaching children concepts, cause and effect relationships, being very intentional with them, cause and effect. If the outcome is a particular way, what was the cause? When I read my son's analysis of what happened to Kamala Harris, it made me proud. Prior to the election, he talked about his predictions. And this is a great summary. I think it's so great that I'm going to share it. Listen, this is called his simple guide to why Kamala Harris lost. Jonathan's guide to why Kamala lost. And he emphasized that this was not written with emotion, but dive in with me. It's really worth listening to because some people are like, I don't know what happened. Why didn't we win? This is for my precious fellow Americans and my brothers and sisters that just don't get it. We love you. We support you. You are fellow Americans, but let me help you understand. And this is what he said. He said, I'm not trying to make or lose friends with what I'm about to say, but I wanted to weigh in on the recent, the political happenings that unfolded, seeing that what he literally predicted that it would happen, and it happened the exact way that he said it would. For reference, prior to the election, he predicted, number 1, that Donald Trump was going to win. Number 2, that Donald Trump would win both the Electoral College and the popular vote. He predicted that the margin of victory with the popular vote would be approximately 4%. It fluctuated between 3 and 4%. The following were the things that led to him having that prediction. Number 1, the manner in which Kamala became the nominee went against America's democratic process. Not a single Democrat voter was able to choose their presidential nominee through the normal primary voting process. She was appointed by delegates in a way that pushed voters to the side. I've never seen it. I've seen 13 presidents. I've never seen this unfold this way. It pushed voters to the side and didn't ask their opinion on who they believed was best suited to be victorious against Donald Trump. It wasn't Kamala. Voting is an intricate part of the democratic process. Being appointed without being democratically voted in, all while accusing Donald Trump of being a threat to democracy, projected a sense of hypocrisy. What's another reason why we had the outcome that we did? The credibility of her word was immediately questionable because she had been calling President Biden sharp for years. Whether it's falling off a bike, tripping on the stairs, getting lost in a room, the constant gas, or his one debate performance of the presidential debate, most would not describe President Biden. He was not sharp. However, this is how Kamala Harris had been describing him for years. Anytime a question about the president's cognition or health came up, she defended him and co-signed on this message of his sharpness, which most people could see it just wasn't true. So on one hand, she described him as sharp, but on the other hand, based on his debate performance, he wasn't deemed as competent enough to beat Trump. These are contradictory, and this point was constantly avoided by Kamala Harris, especially in her Fox News interview with Brett Baker, and the whole world saw it. Thirdly, her campaign did not focus on issues that polls showed most Americans deemed as priorities. The two main issues that the majority of Americans agreed were at the top of the list were the economy and illegal immigration. Polls showed that most Americans trusted Trump more with the economy and immigration. Many would agree that Kamala Harris's two biggest focuses seem to be abortion rights and LGBTQ related issues. Although these issues are very important to some people, our fellow Americans, they were definitely not deemed as being at the top of the list of the majority of Americans. Even when she did speak about the economy, she would say very broad terms like opportunity economy without going into depth on this issue that most Americans deem as most important. What was another issue that caused her to lose? She focused on Trump more than she focused on herself. Anytime she spoke, Trump was mentioned almost endlessly. Donald Trump, Donald Trump. I believe when Anderson Cooper interviewed her from CNN, she said Donald Trump's name 26 times. She did that as opposed to promoting why one should vote for her. She focused on why one shouldn't vote for him. It cost her. Then there's something called the Bradley effect. The Bradley effect. That refers to a phenomenon observed in U.S. elections where white voters, when polled, express support for a black candidate, but then vote against them in the privacy of the voting booth. This effect was named after Tom Bradley, an African-American, a black politician who ran for governor of California in 1982. I remember it. And he lost despite leading in pre-election polls. And with Kamala, they were saying it's neck and neck. I never believed it. I never believed it. The effect is often attributed to socially desirability bias. Those biases where voters give socially acceptable answers in polls, but do not act on those preferences when it comes time to vote, especially in races involving minority candidates. That was addressed. Listen, the Bradley effect is real. Kamala's campaign demonized, shamed, and labeled specific groups for even considering voting for Trump. And so did Obama. Many who looked at Kamala Harris questionably were automatically deemed as either sexist, racist, or both. If they questioned her, they were automatically labeled as sexist, racist, or both. Specific groups such as black men were scolded by people such as Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, and told that they were making excuses to not vote for her simply because they didn't want to have a woman as president. Meanwhile, considerations such as policies on immigration and the economy, the two most important issues to most Americans, which ended up deciding the election results, were not considered as reasons why these groups were considering voting for her opponent. Although more women voted for President Biden in 2020 than voted for Kamala Harris in 2024, many men were automatically labeled as not caring about women's rights for considering not voting for her. These things pushed potential voters away and placed a bad taste in their mouth. Why? Why? Because labeling someone is no way to court their vote. It cost her. What else cost her? She didn't engage in enough unscripted conversation that would have displayed her personality to potential voters, especially those from groups whose votes she desperately needed their vote. But she wouldn't engage in that. She didn't give potential voters enough exposure to her raw personality. The vast majority of her speech sounded like scripted talking points over and over again. Sitting with Joe Rogan on a podcast and having a genuine conversation for 3-4 hours like President Trump did and J.D. Vance did would have shown the male potential voters a side of her personality that they didn't even get to see when she was using a teleprompter or when the interviewer wasn't even relatable to them. They didn't get to see her real personality. Here's something else that hurt her. The overwhelming majority of the media insulated her from difficult questions and fact-checking, which did not toughen her. You got to be quick on your feet. She couldn't handle that. It didn't toughen her and exercise her ability to answer difficult questions. She couldn't handle them. The way in which the media dealt with Kamala Harris and her running mate versus Donald Trump and his running mate was so obviously different that it created a false sense of reality to the Harris campaign and her supporters. They were conditioned to be given softball questions and not be challenged and fact-checked on their statements. This is not an across-the-board statement. However, this happened very often during their campaign. If you look back at the presidential and vice presidential debates, which I've done, and see how many times each side was interrupted or fact-checked by the moderators, and look back at interviews that each side engaged in, and notice the different tones, the approach, the amount of interruptions and fact-checking that the media used, with one side versus the other, it's very obvious that it was different. Another thing that was so glaringly obvious, she didn't effectively identify how she would be different than President Biden. Around 80% of Americans believed that the nation was going in the wrong direction. When on The View, she was specifically asked how her presidency would be different than President Biden's. She stated that nothing comes to mind. Nothing comes to mind. Wow, she missed it royally. It really doesn't need any further elaboration. This response fell flat for Americans who identified the country as going in the wrong direction and effectively signaled that the next 4 years of her would be exactly like the last 4 years of Biden. And I will respectfully submit that it would have gotten worse because of her policies, what her focus was. It was not on what we were focused on and what the issues were. And here's another thing that hurt her. She was placed in an awkward position of not being able to effectively distance herself from Joe Biden without also disparagingly coming against him and herself. Why? She was a part of the whole debacle. Yes, she just was. So, as the Democratic nominee, Kamala Harris wanted to present herself as the candidate of change. As the current vice president of we'll see what unfolds. But as the vice president, she didn't want to disparage Joe Biden. So he disparaged himself and has so even after the election. So when asked how she would be different from him, it placed her in an odd situation where she most likely didn't want to speak badly of an administration that she was a part of. She would, hey, as that emoji says on our phone, it's just like the shrug that shows I was a part of it. If she leaned into the idea of being different from her boss, but also herself, seeing that she had co-signed and supported him just as any vice president would do, it was a setup. It created an odd dynamic for her that proved it was just very difficult to maneuver. Also, voters who expressed their experience and concerns with the economy, they were called stupid. As evidenced by what, Janice? Don Lemon, who said, he's getting off of X, he said that. Okay, some others are as well. This is what happened with Don. He was doing street interviews. Don Lemon was, yeah. He was doing street interviews. And he was asking people who they were voting for. He was surprised at how many people said they were voting for Trump. He asked one man, why are you voting for Trump? The man replied, because I had more money under Trump. The economy was doing better. Don Lemon replied, well, I know that you feel that way, but the economy is actually better right now under Biden. People don't like to basically be told that they are stupid, especially when it comes down to things like money. Don Lemon is a millionaire who is lecturing an average everyday man on his own financial situation. It takes a strong sense of arrogance to speak to someone in this manner regarding their own lived experience. When groceries still cost almost double what it was in 2019, and then you're told that things are actually better now, things simply sound kind of off. And the people saying that also sound totally out of touch with the common man's reality. Listen, this brings us to our clinical perspectives. This brings us to the dynamics of acceptance. Are people in our great nation able to embrace acceptance and make the best of situations and move on? Let me tell you this. For the 4 years from 2020 to 2024, we accepted it. those that voted differently in 2020, we accepted. And guess what? We didn't tear anything up. We didn't burn things down. No, we didn't like it, but we accepted it. How do we handle acceptance? The Mental Health America had some suggestions. I was looking at this and I was like, this is interesting. And it's things I already knew as a clinician and just as an American, and just as I accept and practice as a way of life for myself. What would happen if we notice when we're fighting against reality? What would happen? What would happen if we remind ourselves that we can't change what has already happened? What would happen if we embraced our feeling, put a language to it? You know, about the therapeutic process, you put a language to it. You name, you explain, you process, you metabolize strategies, skills, and tools for wellness and recovery. Yeah. What would happen if we did that as Americans? What would happen if we pretended that we are accepting reality if we're struggling to do it? You know, it's like, gosh, I can't change it, but you know, okay. Here I am. We're going to get a chance to vote again. Maybe I'll even run. We're just, you know, can we change it? What would happen if we learn to relax our bodies? Deep breathing has tremendous, powerful advantages for me. I do it every morning. There's certain stretchings that I do before I even get out of bed. I pray. I consecrate my day to God, my body to God. I do certain exercises. I stretch. I do my crunches. I do my bicycle thing laying in the bed. I lift my legs 50. I went from 30 to 50. I get up. I stretch. I do this thing where it's exercises that contribute to longevity. I want to live long. I'm an older woman now. I'm not some 35-year-old chick anymore. I'm not. I got a birthday coming up. I'll be 68, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to turn 68. I'm not looking too shabby for a 68-year-old. But I'm learning how to practice, how to preserve my longevity. I want to live as long as I can. I told God I want to be an old, spry lady because I want to be around for my grandchildren. I got a lot to contribute to them. Like the things I taught my son that I was talking about earlier. And more. Relaxing my body, learning to relax. What would happen if we did that as Americans together and unite together as Americans? Not Democrats, not Republicans, but as Americans, we the people. What would happen if we use coping statements as we embrace acceptance? What would happen if we told ourselves and gave ourselves permission that it takes practice? What is the coping skill of acceptance? What is that? There's something called radical acceptance. It can be defined as the ability to accept situations that are outside of your control without judging them. I do it all the time at work. Grown people, this is what we do, which reduces the suffering that it could cause if it's okay, radically, I'm going to accept that. I don't like it, but I'm going to remain respectful. By accepting things for what they are, you can acknowledge your emotions without denying, avoiding, or ignoring the situation. What have we looked at tonight? What have we looked at? What have we talked about, my fellow Americans and my brothers and sisters in Christ? We've looked at, can we move on as a nation? Our clinical perspective is dealing with acceptance. I believe we can do it. You got my support, baby. I love my fellow Americans. I love everybody. You know why? You are my fellow American. It's not about Democratic or Republican. It's not about your sexual persuasion. I love my fellow Americans. Let's start there. You know why? We are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, as we together go from destruction to dignity. You know what I'm going to say next? We're going somewhere, and it's expecting us when we get there. I have great expectations for our nation. I have great hope for our nation. You know why? We are still here. I've got something to contribute. You've got something to contribute. Let's keep showing up as we go together from destruction to dignity. Clinical perspectives, spiritual truths. I'll see you next week. Good night.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of From Destruction to Dignity with Janice Pons. Janice's mission is to provoke thought, bring awareness, and point people towards intervention when needed. As a reminder, this show is not therapy, but for educational purposes only. For more information, check out JanicePons.com or follow her on social media.
We are one power, strength is ours, liberty, been set free, education, affirmation, dedication, information, revelation.